Hello, world, and welcome again to another edition of Transcendent. Transcendent comes to you weekly every Tuesday right here on Influencers Platform, where we take the issues of the day and lift them to another plane of conversation. Because the word transcendent means to go beyond normal boundaries. We're going to look at the issues of the day because you and I live in those issues every day. But for the people of God and for those of goodwill, we need a path, a clear path to follow through this maze of stuff that is happening to us each day, and try to find a place where we can make positive change and be the kind of blessing that we want to be to others, not only for our own lives' sake, but for the sake of others also. And you are a listener and a potential partner, which is what I want to talk to you about now before we get into our subject matter for today. You have an opportunity to become an SABWB partner, and you'll see, as particularly this program rolls on today and the things that will follow, why our partnership is essential. It's essential that we come together in like mind, pool our collective resources, pool our collective influence, and make the level of change in our culture that we not only want for ourselves, but we want for our posterity as well. And you have an opportunity to join me in that even now. You can go to sabwb.org, follow a few simple prompts, and you'll become an SABWB partner, allowing you and me to hook up together and make the level of change in the city of San Antonio that we want to make. And which not just we want to make, it's more like we have to. We have to, for the sake of our children and for our children's children, and for the quality of life that we want to either regain and maintain, or that we want to provide as a lifestyle for those who are coming after us as well. And I'll tell you that lifestyle that we have cherished for now 245 years is really hanging in the balance. Something is happening that is quite incredible across the earth. And I want to get into some of that with you today. But before we do, I want to tell you what is the basis, what is the driving point for all of this to happen all over the world, and certainly here in our world, in the United States of America, is people who are praying. Now, you may not be aware of this, but there are people who are bombarding, I could say, they're bombarding heaven with their prayers. For example, an organization called LPI, Lighthouses of Prayer International, formerly led by Joan Courtney, recently, probably within the last year plus, led by Pastor Gene Leffler. Lighthouses of Prayer International have about 20-something homes of women that meet around the city, and they meet together in homes for the purpose of praying. That's why they come together. They meet to pray. When Gene came on board, Pastor Gene Leffler, he added another dynamic of men's prayer groups to that, and have pulled in a group of us pastors now, placing an emphasis on us, or we're actually sharing an emphasis that we already have, to come together for the purposes of prayer. You and I, if we're going to see any change in the earth, it's going to be because we pray. Those pastors that Pastor Gene Leffler and others have called together have committed to meet every first Sunday night of the month from now until the end of 2021, the first Sunday night of the month. Not just the pastors, but congregations coming together on the first Sunday night of each month as we move together in this thing called prayer and invoke the powers of heaven to see the glory of God come and invade the earth, perhaps like some of us have never seen, that transformative power that convicts men's and women's hearts to come to know Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, but then to begin to walk after those principles with intentionality, to begin to tap into the unseen forces of heaven and cause the prayer of Jesus to be fulfilled. He taught us pray in Matthew 6, Luke 11, thy kingdom come and thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We understand that that happens by prayer. I'm going to come back to this August meeting, this meeting every first Sunday in just a minute, but I want to also alert you to Pastor Rob Wallace at Embassy Christian Center. God has placed upon his heart to call together 1,000 intercessors from all over the city that he can put in a text base and text those 1,000 people for an urgent prayer need. You'll get it on your phone. You can get it by just texting the word city, CITY. Text the word city to 210-796-6996. 210-796-6996. If that's not correct, I'll correct it by the time the program is over today. But become a part of that group of 1,000 intercessors that receive these text messages about urgent prayer needs around our city. And there's a lot of them. So let me go back now to the first Sunday night of each month from now until the end of calendar year 2021. A number of churches around the city are not just hosting pastors to come to pray. Now listen to me real good right here, because the things that I'm going to say to you today, you'll see as we move on, they require a people who know how to press into God collectively for the purposes of prayer and to receive from God both strategy and wisdom to move forward in some things that we must undertake to do as the power of God leads us forth in it. I'm excited about this day. I'm excited about what I have to talk to you about today. I'm withholding the title on purpose as I place emphasis on the driving force, the spiritual engine behind the things that will be unfolding in our city is prayer. So make sure that you become a part of the prayer net by dialing that number 210-796-6996. Again, I'll confirm that number. I know that I'll just confirm it for you before we get off the air today. But right in our own offices at SABWB, San Antonio Black, White, and Brown, right in our own offices every Friday from 10 to 11, we go Facebook Live. Our executive director, Natalie Hardy, leads in that. We go Facebook Live in prayer, and we also have a live audience in the offices. Why so much praying? Why is there praying with LPI? Why is there praying with the prayer net? And why is there praying with pastors and congregations? Because we understand where we are. We understand the intensity of the moment in which we now find ourselves. And we know the indispensable power of God is the only thing that's going to bring us to a place where we get to regain some liberty in God, and to regain some equality in God, and to regain some influence, some authority that is rightfully wielded for the glory of God. We understand that if we're going to walk in that we must pray. We must be a people who know how to pray and how we enter into the presence of God to do that very thing. This first portion of the program tonight is all about prayer, and we're actually going to end it in a commercial about prayer in just a moment. But I wanted to just bring to you this knowledge that what's going on in the city, there's tons of prayer going on. So on the first Sunday night of August, the 1st of August happens to be on a Sunday. So the first Sunday night is the 1st of August. We will be meeting for prayer at the great Maranatha Bible Church, pastored by dear friends of mine, Pastor Rander and Darlene Draper, and that praying church. In fact, a lot of those women that I told you about that's in those 22 women's prayer groups, a lot of them are manned by people from Maranatha. It's a praying church, and we're going to come together that night. It's not an eating meeting. It's not a preaching meeting. We're coming together for a single purpose. We're going to worship God in song, and we're going to petition God and make declaration before God and engage the forces of heaven in prayer. So worship and prayer will be going on at Maranatha Church, 6 to 7:30, 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. at Maranatha Bible Church, that great church on 1604, pastored by Pastor Rander and Darlene Draper. Would you not meet us there? Would you beat us there this coming Sunday night, August the 1st, for this level of prayer meeting? It's going to move from church to church throughout the rest of the calendar year. There's some great stuff coming. Pastor Jimmy Robles is now leading another charge in 2022 for a citywide evangelistic thing that will be happening at the Alamo Dome. You need to stay aware of that, but all of that needs to be undergirded by people who pray. That's why my whole point of emphasis in our first section of this program tonight is to encourage the intensity and the intentionality and the skill involved in praying. So let's look at this commercial and come back after it. And the commercial is about our I Pray effort at SABWB. And afterwards, I'll come back and tell you the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight. So here's Natalie with our I Pray commercial.
Hello, my name is Natalie Hardy from SABWB, San Antonio in Black, White, and Brown. Every Friday morning at 10 a.m. we are at this table seeking the face of God on behalf of our city. And if you didn't know that, I wanted you to know so that you can tune in with us and pray with us, whether we do it on that same time or after the fact, and look at a broadcast and pray with us after the fact. Every voice counts. So join with us on Friday mornings, and we look forward to praying with you. Bless you. Bye-bye.
We do look forward to praying with you because the things that we're moving forward with in the city of San Antonio demand a prayer corps. And you can join us at SABWB on Friday mornings or these other prayer efforts, which I also mentioned. And I want you to circle your calendar for August 1st, Sunday night at Maranatha Bible Church. And if your pastor is not a part of that dozen or so pastors, let them know that they're praying over at Maranatha. And they're going to be moving from church to church every Sunday, every first Sunday of the month for the rest of the calendar year. There's a lot to pray about, and we're just going to focus in on it and invoke the powers of heaven, and we're going to see God do what he did when people prayed in the scriptures. He shook things. Things were transformed because of his working mighty power. Now, tonight, I want to give you reasons to pray. I want to give you many good reasons to pray, and I want to introduce to you something that I'll do in two parts. Tonight, I'm going to introduce the People's Movement. The People's Movement. Tonight is part one, and we'll look at the People's Movement part two next Tuesday night. In order to get into that conversation about the People's Movement, I need to say something to you, perhaps for some of you, to bring you up to speed with reference to where we are as a nation right now and what is going on in the nations of the earth. Obviously, there's something going on in the nations of the earth. The people of Cuba have risen up and they're throwing off a socialistic and communistic regime, and they're yearning for freedom. And that is ensuing. The same thing is happening with hundreds of thousands of people in the roads and streets and highways of France. They're demanding a level of freedom and autonomy, which they don't have. Great Britain is undergoing the same thing. All over the world, something is happening. Something transformative is happening around the world. Now, I want to say to you who are members, citizens of San Antonio, I want to introduce to you tonight that a movement has begun in the city of San Antonio, of which you would do well, you would mark yourselves well to become a part of the People's Movement. This is part one that we're talking about tonight. So I want to bring you kind of up to speed as to why there is even something called the People's Movement. Let me do it by going back in a little bit of history. We're 245 years old as of July the 4th this year. We're 245 years old. as a nation. A nation has a lifespan. Uh, uh, we know that just from looking at history. There have been empires that have been on the earth that are no longer here in the form that they were here before. There have been nations of people that have risen and fallen. War and conquest and different kinds of things have come in and removed the people that were once powerful and notable among the peoples of the earth. I'm thinking now, close to our own context, south of our border in Central America, uh, particularly Mexico and Central America, the Mayans, the Indians, and the Aztecs, and even the Indian tribes that were here in these United States of America, the Hopi Indians, the Apache, the uh, uh, different tribes, the Iroquois, different tribes of Indians that were here on this land. There were people who were here. Their empire was here. Their lifestyle was here. But something has happened to move those nations out, and another nation or another people have been established. Now, this is not strange to us because it also happens in the pages of Scripture. But we are now 245 years into a relatively new nation on the earth. It's a relative because some, like the UK and others, have been around much longer. They have some buildings in the United Kingdom that's older than this entire nation. They've been built longer than 245 years ago. So on the horizon of nations, we're a young nation. But this nation, like all nations, have a lifespan, and the lifespan of this nation or any nation is affected by the people's responses to God and to the things of God. Now, I want you to remember what I just said. A nation's lifespan is directly impacted by the people's response to God, his principle, his ways, and to his person. So if a nation will embrace the things of God, that nation can contribute to the welfare of the human condition on earth, and they can add to the pages of illustrious human history that is filled as time rolls on. But a nation who will stiffen its neck and harden its heart against God, that nation sets itself up for other nations who may be even more stiff and more hard and more cruel to come in and wipe them out. And so you have this uh, movement, rising and falling of empires and nations all over the earth. So I want to let you know that for the 245 years that we have been a nation, we have come through times in our lifespan as a nation. Those times really helped to determine whether or not we would continue as a nation or whether we would engage the road of decline and move off the face of nations, or whether we would ascend and become a greater influence for the human for the human experience on earth. Certain activities within our lifespan as a nation have dictated that. I want to go through 5 of them very quickly with you. Obviously, the first would be 1776. This is the Declaration of Independence, where as a nation, we began to seek clearance from the ruling party, the ruling nation at that time, which is Great Britain. I want to read to you just a portion of what is in the Declaration of Independence with respect to this. It says, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which they have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth that separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. So they're asserting that the laws of nature and of nature's God inserts or entitles a people to take their separate but equal place. The term separate but equal was used wrongfully in this nation's history, but In this particular case, it is talking about the nation being born to take its own separate and equal place among the nations. It goes on to read, uh, a decent respect of the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to this separation. So they begin to declare the reasons that they wanted to separate. I'm going to come back to this because in this little booklet that I have in front of you now, it's a very thin document. You see that? It's very thin. It contains two documents. It is the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence. The first paragraph of the Declaration I just read to you. 1776, we declare a declaration from Great Britain, and we go through a war, and God graces the nation to come out of the war as an independent free nation. It now takes its place among its separate and equal place among the nations of the earth. This is what they declared, and it happened. They made a declaration, and that declaration happened. So we now enjoy what we know to be the United States of America and the rights and the privileges that are associated therewith in terms of our citizenship, because someone declared it and then they begin to work for it. So hence the Declaration of Independence. And so the nation was born, and I could say much more about that, but I'm going to move on to the other critical crucible times in our nation's history. What is a crucible, by the way? A crucible is a container. Is usually made of refractory metals that refract heat. In other words, the container doesn't get hot, but it allows things in it to get hot. So a crucible is something used, a container that's used to bring things to a severe heat. A crucible also looks in this direction of coming through a very severe time of testing. When your life is in a crucible, or a nation, as I'm expressing to you tonight, as a nation is in a crucible, it goes through very critical time to determine whether or not it can even survive as a nation. The first crucible was in the Revolutionary War. The second was in the Civil War. We went through a time, the nation from 1776 to 1861, we're in this time period now when we enter into a civil war to declare what kind of nation this is going to be going forward. Will it be a nation that will hold to the statements it makes in its founding documents? Right over here in the Constitution. It tells us about the thought process that went forward with the people as they began to write the Constitution. We hold these truths, you remember that, to be self-evident, that all men, how many men? All men. How many? All. Does all mean all? Does all mean the black man and the white man and the yellow man and the red man and the brown man? Does all mean all? Now, some will tell you, no, when they wrote that, they wasn't talking about black people. I've heard black people say that, black leadership say that. I beg to differ. And I'll say some things to you tonight concerning what Abraham Lincoln said at the Gettysburg Address that will point in the direction of that when they said all men are created equal, they actually meant all men are created equal. Someone will say, then why slavery, and why did they have slaves and all of that? The people who wrote the document did not live out this document perfectly, but they wrote it to keep calling themselves back to its pages. I'll speed ahead to here to say that one of the prophets of our age, one of the most profound and prophetic men that this nation has ever known, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And what he did in his in the civil rights movement is that he called the nation back to its own documents and said, those things that you have written in these documents, you should as a nation make good on them. And we as a people in the nation believe what you wrote. And so we are demanding our equal place of dignity among the people in this nation. So we went through this crucible of the Revolutionary War. We go through another crucible of the Civil War. All of these deserve examination in and of themselves, but we're not going to give it tonight because we got too much to cover. The third crucible was when the stock market crashed in, let me just say, we came out of the second crucible, 1865, slavery ended, and at the same year, 1865, there was another thing enjoined called the Black Codes, which was actually legalized slavery. So we're going to come back to it. But slavery as it was being practiced, taking somebody, beating them to death, in some cases with a whip, mutilating them, treating them subhuman, all of that under the banner of human decency came to an end, or human superiority, I should say, came to an end at the end of the Civil War. They could no longer strap a black man or to a tree. They could no longer take him, separate him from his family, or could no longer breed him as though he were a bull or some other yard animal. All of that ended in 1865. You can imagine. But those who held that power for so long did not give it up easily. They instituted something else called the Black Codes, which was designed for black people. That's why it was called the Black Codes. It was designed for black people to now bring them into this kind of legalized slave condition. And that lasted up until another crucible event happened. But between the end of 1865, another crucible event took place in 1929. So you're looking at about 35, another 65 years later, and you'll see in the trail of the nation, it's about every 70 or so years, we run into another crucible. So in 1929, the stock market crashed and the viability of the nation financially hang in the balance, and people could not, the job market crashed, people standing in soup lines, everything came to a halt. They were sending their children out into their relatives in the country so that they could live off the land because they couldn't in the large cities. They would literally stand in soup lines all day long or stand for a loaf of bread or a bowl of soup or something like that. They were starving. And that didn't just happen just a few days. The stock market crashed in 1929. We did not end that crisis until the end of the Second World War, which started in 1941 for the U.S. We entered December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. But then the war didn't end until 1945. But we came out of that third crucible with global power. We were a global power when we emerged from the Second World War. It's incredible. Revolutionary War, Civil War, stock market crash in the Second World War. And then the next crucible number 4, was the Civil Rights Movement. This thing that started in 1865 ran a course for another 100 years, oppressing people, not as severely in slavery, but severe nonetheless. You know, people couldn't eat at the same bar. They couldn't walk through the front door of the same restaurant just because of the color of their skin. Couldn't be educated in the same facilities and in the same way because of the color of their skin. They could not live in a certain area of town because of the color of their skin. All of that came to a head under the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others that set about to break the tyranny of racism and classism that had so strangled the throat of this burgeoning nation. And of course, God blessed, and we came out yet again of that particular crucible in better shape. In fact, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now, and you wouldn't have any inclination to listen to me if you are non-Black than you would listen to a dog bark or a donkey bray, because my color would have separated us so you wouldn't need to pay any attention to me. But something happened. The nation came out of that. We began to appreciate one another's diversity, and we came out of this fourth crucible alive and well and better. We're in a fifth right now. Yes, I said it. We're in a fifth crucible right now. We're in this time period when our rights, freedom of speech, the right to vote, the right even to differ without being violently disagreeable, the right to maintain a capitalistic based uh, economy and lifestyle, all of that is now up for grabs. We're in a time where we could come out of this nation, come out of this crucible on a downward spiral. I don't believe we will. I believe that God will give us the grace to come out of this crucible as we have come out of the previous four, having learned, changed, grown, and moving upward. But it's up to us, the people's movement, as to whether or not that will happen. I'm going to go to commercial here, and I'm going to remind you here that at this point of the game, we do need to come together and see some things happen, or we could come out of this crucible and never return to the heights that we have once known as a nation. View this commercial, and I'll be right back afterwards. Hello, everyone. I'm Charles Flowers, your host for Transcendent. Transcendent is SABWB's online weekly broadcast aired here on Influence's platform. Join me and other key leaders from various pillars of influence which shape the culture of San Antonio for innovative and strategic dialogue. Each week, we will address core community values and principles that need to be restored and re-implemented into our culture of our great city. This may often necessitate identifying where these values and principles are being compromised and reflecting on the damaging impact that such actions may have if left unaddressed. But ultimately, we want to take the conversation beyond ordinary limits, exceed the normative boundaries, and implement bold, time-tested principles across the pillars of influence in our city, which will result in the positive transformation of the culture. I look forward to visiting with you each week here on Transcendent. All right, here we are on Transcendent, and thanks for being with me again today. And I think our culture certainly needs the infusion of the life and the wisdom and the power of God through his people, that the people's movement, and this is what I want to introduce to you now, the people's movement must be initiated and must be multiplied going forward to gain momentum and power and strength. The people's movement, the people's movement. And I want to start by telling you the necessity for. I just told you about the five crucibles that we as a people, as a nation, have come through. I want to draw your attention back to the Constitution now, and say this to you. I'm gonna do a PowerPoint with you tonight as well, because I want you to be able to see it. The first frame is the people's movement, but the second one is this one right here. There's a reason that the framers joined to write the Constitution. And they state the reasons for it. One, it is to form a more perfect union. Two, it is to establish justice. Three, it is to ensure domestic tranquility. Four is to provide for the common defense. Five is to promote the general welfare. Six, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. To do all of those things, we ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States. What I just quoted to you was the preamble to the Constitution, and you see it on the screen. That we, the people of the United States, in order to, one, form a more perfect union, two, establish justice, three, ensure domestic tranquility, four, provide for the common defense, five, promote the general welfare, six, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. Now, listen, every reason they gave is right now under the threat of compromise or destruction. Every reason they gave is now under the threat of either compromise or destruction. As we continue to look, the more perfect union is now being threatened by organizations called Black Lives Matter and Antifa and a dozen of other splinter groups, the Klan, hate groups, the uh, white supremacist groups, all of them are pulling and tugging at the union that you and I, as American citizens, long to have. Most of us do. They're pulling and tugging at it. No, this is mine, and no, that's mine, and no, this is an injustice, and that's an injustice. And the continual tug of war is fatiguing the soul of America. And yet the founders wrote the Constitution to form a more perfect union. So we have to have a more perfect union, but we cannot get there pulling in 20 different directions. This will splinter this beautiful tapestry. It will rip it to shreds. And our posterity would have suffered a loss, a great loss. And so would have the nations of the earth. Because the United States of America has stood for most of these 245 years of our existence as a beacon of hope. This is why the people are still rushing to these shores. This American experiment is unique among peoples of the earth. But we are now under attack. As I said before, it's as if though freedom is being chased through the forest by predators whose only goal it is to capture and tear freedom apart. So this form of more perfect union thing is being threatened. How about the next one? Establish justice. As sorrowful as it is for us to admit, what Hillary Clinton did and what Hunter Biden has done, and a host of other actors, both high profile and not so high profile, have convinced us, regrettably convinced us, that there is a two-tier justice system in America. The law can be used to come down on a Roger Stone and totally exonerate a Hillary Clinton. The law can be used to penalize one ethnic group and jail them, and almost free with a simple slap on the hand another ethnic group that has done even worse in terms of its behavior and its overall impact on the culture. We hate to admit it, but there is a two-tier system. And one of the reasons that the forebearers, our forebearers, wrote the Constitution was to establish justice. Now, I'll remind you right here that justice really comes from God, because he alone is perfectly just. So justice comes from him. Martin Luther King, again, referred to a passage in the book of Amos, chapter 5, verse 24. Let righteousness roll down like waters and justice like a mighty stream. There needs to be the return of righteousness and justice, that everybody plays by the same set of rules. But when you class people with socialism and other kinds of classisms, even among capitalist societies, you can have a class of people, and that class of people will enjoy the privileges of citizenship while the responsibilities is laid on the shoulders of others. There's no equal share in responsibility, no equal share in privilege. But that comes from God. Remember, but the nation was birthed to establish justice. Justice comes from God. When America returns to God, America can return to justice. But if America keeps moving away from God, the only thing left for America is human brand of justice. And in the human brand of justice, somebody wins and somebody loses. Somebody is advantaged and somebody is disadvantaged. Somebody is privileged and some is underprivileged. That's human justice. But in the justice of God, there is a just playing field across the board. Whether you're black, white, red, yellow, brown, it doesn't matter. Your God's word is, he says in Malachi, I am the Lord your God, and I change not. So he doesn't mete out justice because he has a crony. He doesn't mete out justice because he has favorites. Justice is justice, and if we're going to return to establish justice, then we have to return to God in order for that to happen. So the next one says that to ensure domestic tranquility, and you saw that anything except that is going on in the summer of 2020, and even now, as streets are becoming blood zones, war zones. We're losing more in Chicago than we've lost in Afghanistan. In a war conflict, we're losing more lives in South Chicago than we did in Afghanistan. It's horrible, and the move has gone about now to defund the police. That does not ensure domestic tranquility. Everything that we have moved forward with and placed down on paper for this nation to be formed, those things are now being threatened right in front of us. So what do we do? I'm glad you asked. So I'm going to talk about that at the end of our broadcast tonight. What do we do? Here's what we do. We enjoin the people's movement. We have to take responsibility in our own hands and execute nonviolent, direct action to gain our freedoms back. I'll tell you how to do that going forward. Here's some other things that we said was the reason for the establishment of the Constitution. One was to provide for the common defense. Not if the Green New Deal, AOC and the Green New Deal has anything to do with it. They want to strip the Green New Deal or use the Green New Deal to strip military spending and turn it toward social programs, causing our national defense to suffer, not knowing that there are people, hostile nations that are just waiting on a weakened America, because America, again, is a bright beacon to the world, even now in her sick condition. She's still a bright beacon to the world. There's still a crisis of people trying to get into the country. She's still a bright beacon. But that thing about national provide for the common defense is under fire also. How about promote the general welfare? The economy runs on small business. The current policies of this administration is crippling small business and actually making them subservient to the government for their sustainability. That doesn't provide for promote the general welfare. That threatens the viability of the very backbone of our economy, which is a small business. All of this is happening before our eyes. One stood up and asked, a restaurateur stood up and asked our current president what his administration was going to do to strengthen small business, because his greatest need right now was to get employees back. And his job, and the president's answer was, well, you can thank us that you're still open because we shelled out money so you could stay open. Now, if you want to get your employees back, pay them more. That's speaking from someone who has never run a small business. Because when you run a small business, you know you have an outline of pay scales and personnel that you can take on. You can't arbitrarily say, pay them more. Because not only do you have to pay your employees and things associated with their employment, but you also got to pay fines and fees to the government. Someone who would make that statement doesn't understand business. So there's no promoting the general welfare that's going forth in this administration. It will be seen should this be allowed to roll on forward. I don't believe that it will be, but should it, things will get very difficult in the nation. We could see soup lines happening again in America just because the tactics and the policies that is being used by this current administration are so destructive. How about securing the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity? Listen, folks, how do we secure the blessing? The people have to move. The people have to arise. The people have to make demand. Nonviolent, strategic, direct action against these things that are threatening our lifestyle and livelihoods. If you are listening to me tonight, I invite you under the auspices, the umbrella of SABWB, because we're initiating this thing called the People's Movement. We will be calling for you in mass to meet at certain locations. We're going to pray through strategic action. We'll talk to a community-based leadership core to make that to make those strategic actions known. And it's a think tank. It's not us driving the bus. It's a think tank, a joint responsibility that you and I, as citizens in San Antonio, that we undertake to make sure that the powers that be are not going to manipulate and use us. I'll just tell you this: no institution that has been invested with power gives it up easily or willingly, because usually the power also provides a structure through which wealth and money and finance and position and acclaim, all of that flows through that that power structure. So they don't give up the power structure easily. It takes consistent, bold, nonviolent, direct action against strategic centers and silos of influence, that until pressure is placed on them, and that pressure causes things to change. You and I must undertake that. We cannot wait on City Hall to do it. We cannot wait on the business chamber to do it, because many times those kinds of institutions in our lands today, and particularly right here in the city of San Antonio, those institutions are complicit with developing this network of control that shuts your voice down and causes you to acquiesce to their demands and their commands upon us as a free people. If we're going to remain free, San Antonio, the people's movement must be ensued. The people's movement must be engaged. The people's movement must grow. So you may be saying to yourself, how do I become a part of the people's movement? I'm glad you asked. This is in part 2, and we're actually going to tell you the part 2 next week. But I want you to stay tuned to this. I want you to pass this around, because we don't have a choice in this matter. It must be spirit-led. It must be energized by the desire of people who still want to remain free. It must be engaged by those who are willing to stay in for the long haul, those who are not looking for immediate gratification. It must be fostered by those who are prayerful, and those who will seek the wisdom of God, and those who will then move out on that godly instruction to make good on the promises that are laid up in this Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence. I want to just end our time today with this idea put forth in Abraham Lincoln's speech, the Gettysburg Address. Now, some will say that the war was not about slavery. It was about keeping the Union together. They will cite that Abraham Lincoln himself said that if he could win the war, keep the Union together, and keep slavery, he would have done it. I have never seen that. By the way, let me just tell you, and I have Abraham Lincoln's autobiography in my library and several books written on him. I've never seen him make such a statement in any of that literature. So let me just tell you this. The current revisionist ideas of education will make up lies and tell them to you as true. I want to read to you what he wrote at the Gettysburg Address. Some of you will recall this. I'll quote some of it. In the beginning, he opens it up by saying, 7 years ago, remember that from high school? 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. All men are created equal. This is what the Declaration said. So he refers back to the founding documents. He borrows a statement from them, all men are created equal. And he said that this nation was conceived in liberty and dedicated to that proposition. All men are created equal. He says, now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Can any nation who says all men are created equal endure for long? Because the battle was over that. The battle was over whether or not the South, who were not willing to say that the black man or the slave was equal to himself, and he had science backing him up in making his claims, because Charles Darwin wrote a book in 1859 called The Origin of the Species, and in it he makes a scientific claim of the devolution, or the underdevelopment of the black race, and justifying them to treat blacks, horribly. So the nation is now embroiled. This is what he says. We're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war, he says, and we have come to dedicate a portion of that field. Here's what I want to, I'll just read the next few lines here. Let's see. Yeah, portion of that field. As a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that nation might live. They gave their lives so that nation, what nation? That nation that is conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. These men are Gettysburg. They gave their lives so that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper. He goes on to say that we do that in a larger sense. We cannot dedicate. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hollow this ground, because the men living and dead have already done so. He says, it is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus so far nobly advanced. We must dedicate ourselves to the unfinished work. The people's movement must dedicate itself to the unfinished work of securing liberty for ourselves and for our posterity. We must dedicate ourselves to the unfinished work of providing for the common defense and promoting the general welfare. It's unfinished because it's being attacked. And we cannot sit around and point our finger at the news and listen, oh, that's so bad and this is so bad. People, we must move. Hence the name, People's Movement. And I want to tell you how you can engage this next week. Already, I'll just tell you already, we are meeting on Mondays with political and legal people. On Tuesdays, we're meeting with business people. On Wednesdays, we're meeting with sports and entertainment folks. On Thursday, we're meeting with ministries and ministry leaders. On Friday, we dedicate that to I Pray. We pray all week, but on Friday, we dedicate that time to pray. All of these folks coming together. We had our first kind of interim gathering at the Restoration Barbecue at Camargo Park just this past Friday. You're going to see some of that going forward. Got some Zoom footage and some other stuff that we are going to put together for you to be able to see. But the people's movement must continue to gain momentum, and the people's movement needs you to lift your voice and to come together with people who still love freedom, who still believe in the tenets of the Constitution and the Declaration. You still believe that this document and the things that are written in it are worth fighting for. You still believe that you want to pass this on to your children and to your children's children so that they live in a nation, or a city, in this case, the city of San Antonio, that's free. So our action is not about a national thing so much, although it's going to have national ramification. Our action as a people's movement, we're going to go right directly, nonviolent, direct action, right at the institution and places that seek to cramp us, bind us. We're going to throw off unrealistic and unsubstantiated restriction. We have to. We have to. And I want to tell you that the People's Movement is going to move forward and do that very thing. Here's what you can do, though, in the meantime. Share this piece of our program tonight. Share it with someone else. And when you do, tell them to write in the comments portion of this broadcast tonight, I'm a part of the People's Movement. I'm a part of the People's Movement. You can do that right now. I'm a part of the People's Movement. Our office is going to see every one of those, and we're going to get in contact with every one of you. Next week, I'll have some clearer ways laid out for you where you can enjoy, and I'm just kind of saving that till the end. But I want to enlist you very strategically next week to join the People's Movement. We'll soon come together after we have a list of people in place, and then we'll talk through strategic nonviolent direct action on what we can do to regain our freedoms and throw off these things that are not a part of the free America, not a part of free San Antonio. This will be a free San Antonio. We will walk in this city in freedom, and we'll pass a free city on to another generation. We cannot wait on the supposed political structures or the business structures or any of that to do this for us. We must be determined that we are going to undertake freedom, the quest for freedom, in our own hands, and the People's Movement must move forward to see it happen. Thank you in advance for becoming a part of the People's Movement. Now, here's how you can help practically. You can become a partner at SABWB. On the screen, you will soon see a manner in which you can become our partner. Go right to it. I had it here on this screen. I don't see it anymore, so I hope you can see it wherever you are. You can go right to the screen and walk through at our website, SABWB, on how you can become an SABWB partner. Click on the one that says become a partner now, or you can click on the banner that says I want to give a one-time gift. It says something like that. If you want to give a one-time gift to it, because the People's Movement moving forward is going to require a lot. It's going to require some licensing, and it's going to require some permits. It's going to require some different things begotten. It's going to require some equipment, all of that. The People's Movement needs you. And we're not going to sit back, San Antonio. We're not going to sit back and just wait for City Hall and wait for the business chamber and wait for somebody else. No, we're not. The People's Movement is going to begin here in the city of San Antonio, and nonviolent direct action we're going to take to gain our freedom back. We can't do that here and there. We must be a collective voice, a powerful collective voice that brings the People's Movement to bear in the city of San Antonio. Can't wait for you to be with us. So you saw how you can become our partner there. Just go to our website at sabwb.org and become a part of the People's Movement. We're going to actually have some icons and stuff on our site next week that you can click on and become an official People's Movement member and help us. Because what we're doing not only for ourselves, we're securing the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. And I know that you want to be a part of that. Maybe perhaps you've been waiting on a rallying point. This is it. Perhaps you've been waiting on a collective action. This is it. The People's Movement is it. So thank you so much for doing that. And thank you so much for becoming our partners as we move forward in it. We'll have to go through some training as a group, massive training and massive groups. What does it mean? How do we execute that nonviolent direct action? How do we, what do we say? How do we behave? What do we say to those who are malign and hate and do all the kinds of crazy stuff because we're demanding our freedom? Yeah, we'll have to go through some training, but then that training is going to be is going to end in execution. We're going to get our freedoms back in the city of San Antonio for the glory of God. Someone says, what does this have to do with God? God is the only free agent, and he's the source from which freedom springs. Any quest for freedom is in a Godward direction. Any quest to return human dignity and honor and truth and justice, all of those things spring from God. And it's upon him that we rely to make the kind of change that the people's movement in San Antonio has to make. We will see you next week. Blessings to you. Have a good night. Bye-bye now.